What happens when the galaxy's most feared botanical expert discovers that humans carry their own destruction in small metal boxes? When Professor Zyxthera, renowned across 17 star systems for her expertise in weaponized flora, begins her lecture on the deadliest plants in known space, she expects the usual terrified gasps from her audience. What she doesn't expect is for the lone human in the back row to casually pull out his lunch and begin eating something that should have killed him 3 bites ago. In a universe where a single spore can wipe out colonies and where botanical warfare decides the fate of civilizations, one species stands apart not because they're immune to deadly plants, but because they've been eating them for lunch their entire lives. This is the story of how humanity's strangest trait turned a routine academic lecture into a revelation that would shake the foundations of galactic understanding. Sometimes the most dangerous predator in the room is the one quietly enjoying his sandwich. The auditorium fell silent as Professor Zyxthera stepped onto the floating platform that would serve as her stage. Her forearms moved with practiced precision as she arranged her holographic display equipment, each gesture deliberate and confident. The Kethmoran botanist had given this lecture hundreds of times across dozens of worlds, but today felt different. Today, she had a human in her audience. She glanced briefly at the back row where Markuschan sat, his unremarkable appearance making him blend into the sea of alien faces around him. The human looked comfortable enough, though she noticed he carried a small metal container that he kept close to his side. Probably some primitive recording device, she assumed. Humans were known for their crude technology, after all. Welcome, students, researchers, and distinguished guests, Zyxthera began, her voice amplified through the hall's bioacoustic system. Today we embark on a journey through the most dangerous botanical specimens known to galactic science. We will explore plants so deadly that entire civilizations have fallen to their toxic embrace, species so violent that they actively hunt sentient life across star systems. The audience shifted nervously. This was exactly the reaction she expected. Fear was a healthy response when discussing the subjects of her expertise. She had spent 3 centuries studying the galaxy's most lethal flora, survived encounters that had claimed the lives of hundreds of researchers, and earned her reputation as the foremost authority on weaponized vegetation. Our first specimen, she continued, activating her holographic display, is the Crimson Whisper of Andorian Prime. The image that materialized above her was breathtaking in its beauty, a flower that seemed to pulse with its own inner light, petals that shifted from deep red to brilliant orange like living flames. Beautiful, is it not? This single bloom contains enough neurotoxins to kill every person in this auditorium within 30 seconds of exposure to its pollen. Several students in the front rows leaned back involuntarily. Good. Healthy fear would keep them alive. The Crimson Whisper evolved on a world where competition for pollinators was fierce. Rather than compete, it chose to eliminate. Its pollen doesn't just kill, it hijacks the nervous system first, forcing victims to walk directly toward other Crimson Whisper plants, spreading the toxin further before death occurs. Entire expeditions have been found arranged in perfect circles around these flowers, their final moments spent in involuntary worship of their killer. A Veltarian student raised one of her many hands. Professor, surely protective suits would. The toxin penetrates standard environmental suits within minutes, Zyxthera interrupted. Only military-grade biohazard equipment provides adequate protection, and, even then, exposure time must be limited to prevent seepage through microscopic breaches. She moved to her next slide, which displayed a plant that looked like a massive Venus flytrap crossed with a spider. The hunter's web of Kelos 7. Unlike most deadly plants, this one is mobile. It can move up to 50 kilometers in a single day, following prey through scent trails that can be detected across continents. The image showed the plant's enormous maw, lined with rows of needle-sharp thorns that glistened with digestive acids. The hunter's web doesn't just kill for nutrients. It appears to enjoy the hunt. Survivors of attacks report hearing something resembling laughter emanating from the plant as it pursues victims. The plant toys with its prey, allowing escape only to recapture them repeatedly until they collapse from exhaustion. A collective shudder ran through the audience. Even the typically stoic Senkari delegates looked uncomfortable. The most disturbing aspect of the hunter's web is its intelligence. It learns from each encounter, adapting its hunting strategies. There are documented cases of these plants using tools, dropping rocks from cliffs onto prey, or using fallen trees as battering rams to break into shelters. Dr. Pextala, a fellow researcher from Rigel Station, spoke up from the side of the auditorium. "Professor, I've heard rumors about a specimen that actually developed space travel capabilities. Is this true?" ZYX-Theron nodded grimly. "The void hunger of the nebula drift. Yes, these plants have indeed achieved limited space travel. They grow in the vacuum of space, feeding on stellar radiation and cosmic dust. When they detect the chemical signatures of a living world, they launch themselves toward it using a form of biological propulsion we still don't fully understand." She displayed an image taken by a deep space monitoring station, something that looked like a massive dark flower with petals that seemed to absorb light itself, drifting through the void between stars. The void hunger doesn't land on planets, it positions itself in orbit and releases spores into the atmosphere. These spores are designed to survive re-entry and can lie dormant in soil for decades before activating when they detect the right biological markers. "What kind of markers?" asked a student. "Any form of complex life," ZYX-Theron replied. "But they show a particular preference for highly developed nervous systems. Intelligence appears to be a delicacy to them." She was warming up now, falling into the rhythm that had made her lectures legendary throughout the academic community. Each revelation built upon the last, creating a crescendo of horror that left her audiences both terrified and fascinated. "Consider the screaming thorns of Belterra 3, she continued, displaying an image of what appeared to be an innocent shrub covered in small white flowers. "The name comes from the sound they make when feeding. The plant's root system can extend for kilometers underground, and, when it detects vibrations from footsteps above, it strikes." The hologram shifted to show a cross-section view of the plant's underground network, a massive web of roots topped with needle-sharp projections. The thorns burst through the ground with enough force to penetrate standard body armor. But here's what makes them truly terrifying: they don't kill immediately. The thorns inject a paralytic that keeps victims conscious but immobile while the plant slowly drains their life essence over a period of days. The screaming comes from the victims, not the plant. A nervous laugh came from somewhere in the middle rows. ZYX-Theron fixed the offender with a cold stare. "You find this amusing?" she asked. "No, Professor," the student replied quickly. "It's just, well, it seems impossible that such things could exist. Surely evolution wouldn't produce something so unnecessarily cruel." "Evolution doesn't care about our sensibilities," ZYX-Theron replied sharply. "It cares only about survival and reproduction. The screaming thorns have perfected both. Their victims' cries attract scavengers, which are then caught by secondary traproots. The plant feeds on everything that comes to investigate. It's quite efficient." She noticed that the human in the back row had opened his metal container and was examining its contents. Probably some form of recording equipment, she thought again, though it seemed oddly primitive even for human standards. "Our next specimen requires special caution even in holographic form," she announced, her tone becoming more serious. "The mind-eater of Proxima Solis is perhaps the most dangerous plant we've yet discovered, because it attacks not the body, but consciousness itself." The image that appeared was surprisingly subtle, a small, almost mushroom-like growth that seemed to shift and blur at the edges, as if the recording equipment couldn't quite capture its true form. "The mind-eater's spores don't cause physical harm. Instead, they infiltrate the brain through the respiratory system and begin rewriting neural pathways. Victims don't die, they simply stop being who they were." A hush fell over the auditorium. This was new material, information that hadn't been widely distributed yet. "The process is gradual," ZYX-Theron continued. "Over a period of weeks, the victim's personality slowly changes. They become obsessed with protecting the mind-eater, treating it like a beloved child. They'll attack anyone who threatens the plant, even family members. Eventually, they lose the ability to think about anything except serving the plant's needs." "How do we know this if the victims don't recover?" Dr. Pextala asked. "Because one of my research assistants was exposed during our initial study," ZYX-Theron replied quietly. "Dr. Kexmiran was one of the finest scientific minds I'd ever worked with. 3 weeks after exposure, he tried to feed me to his new friend. We had to keep him under constant sedation for his own safety and ours." The audience was completely silent now. Even the soft humming of the building's environmental systems seemed too loud. "The mind-eater appears to be cultivating a slave force," she continued. "Infected individuals don't just protect a single plant, they seek out new locations to spread spores, always with the same gentle smile and the same empty eyes." She advanced to her next slide, showing a massive tree-like structure with bark that seemed to writhe and pulse with its own malevolent life. The devourer trees of Gamma Cygni represent perhaps the most aggressive form of plant life we've encountered. These giants can reach heights of 2,000 meters and actively reshape entire ecosystems to serve their needs. The image zoomed in on the tree's surface, revealing that what had appeared to be bark was actually a complex network of muscular tendrils. Devourer trees don't just compete with other plants for resources, they wage war. They can uproot themselves and walk across continents, crushing everything in their path. But they're not mindlessly destructive. They're strategic. She showed footage of a devourer tree methodically destroying a city, its massive limbs precisely targeting infrastructure while avoiding certain buildings. They spare structures that contain large numbers of people because they plan to use them as feeding stations. The trees position themselves around population centers and release airborne chemicals that keep inhabitants docile and compliant. Then, they feed slowly, keeping their food supply alive for as long as possible. A student near the front raised her hand, trembling slightly. "Professor, how is it possible that planets with such dangerous flora ever developed intelligent life at all?" "An excellent question," HFY replied. "The answer is both simple and terrifying: they didn't. Every one of these plants evolved on worlds where intelligent life once flourished. The crimson whisper grows in the ruins of Andorian cities. The hunter's web navigates using ancient Colossian road systems. The mind-eaters spread through abandoned research facilities on Proxima Solis." She let that revelation sink in before continuing. "These plants didn't just compete with intelligent life, they won. They represent the ultimate expression of botanical evolution, weapons designed specifically to eliminate thinking beings." The human in the back row was doing something odd now. He had removed what appeared to be some kind of food item from his container and was examining it closely. HFY found herself momentarily distracted by his behavior, but forced her attention back to the lecture. "Which brings us to our final specimen for today's session," she announced. "The most dangerous plant known to galactic science, the soul garden of the void reaches." A hologram that appeared was unlike anything else she had shown. It looked almost crystalline, like a flower made of living glass that reflected images that weren't really there. Looking at it too long made the viewer feel slightly disoriented. "The soul garden exists partially outside normal spacetime," she explained. "We believe it originated in another dimension and somehow crossed into ours during the Great Rift event 3,000 years ago." "What makes it so dangerous?" asked Dr. Pextala. "It feeds on the life force of entire species," HFY replied. "Not individuals, entire species. When a soul garden takes root on a world, every member of the dominant intelligent species begins to experience vivid dreams about a beautiful garden. The dreams become more frequent and more intense over time, until the dreamers prefer the dream world to reality." She paused, allowing the implications to become clear. "Eventually, they stop waking up. Their bodies survive, kept alive by the plant's influence, but their consciousness is trapped in the dream garden forever. From our perspective, they simply lie down and never get up again." The silence in the auditorium was profound now. Even HFY found herself moved by the weight of what she was describing. The truly insidious aspect is that the dream garden is genuinely paradise. Those who've been exposed and rescued before complete absorption describe it as the most beautiful place they've ever seen. They beg to be allowed to return. Some have killed themselves rather than live without it. She was about to continue when she noticed that the human had actually taken a bite of whatever he had removed from his container. Her train of thought derailed completely. What was he eating during her lecture on deadly plants? HFY tried to regain her composure, but her eyes kept drifting back to the human. Marcus Chen appeared completely unconcerned by her lecture's content, methodically chewing whatever he had taken from his container. The casualness of it was profoundly disturbing. Here she was, describing plants that had wiped out entire civilizations, and this primitive being was having a snack. The Soul Garden's influence extends far beyond individual worlds, she continued, forcing herself to focus on her presentation. There are indications that it can affect space travel routes, drawing ships toward infected systems through manipulation of hyperspace navigation beacons. But, even as she spoke, part of her mind remained fixated on the human's behavior. What kind of creature ate during a lecture about galactic-level threats? Was this some sort of stress response? She had heard that humans were remarkably adaptable, but this seemed beyond adaptation into the realm of the absurd. A Regellian student raised a tentacle-like appendage. Professor, surely galactic quarantine protocols prevent the spread of these organisms? Quarantine is only effective if you know what you're dealing with, ZYX replied, grateful for the distraction. Many of these species are masters of deception. The mind-eater, for instance, can remain dormant for decades, showing no signs of its presence until it's already infected an entire population. She advanced her holographic display to show a star chart marked with red zones. These are systems currently under botanical quarantine. As you can see, the affected areas have grown significantly over the past century. The map was sobering. Nearly a third of known space was marked in various shades of red, indicating different levels of botanical contamination. Some areas were marked with pulsing crimson indicators that meant complete loss, systems where no ship could safely travel, worlds where the plants had achieved complete dominance. The situation is deteriorating, she admitted. Despite our best efforts, these organisms continue to spread. They're not just adapting to our containment strategies, they're learning from them. Dr. Pextala leaned forward in her seat. You're suggesting these plants are developing intelligence? I'm not suggesting it, ZYX replied grimly. I'm stating it as confirmed fact. We've documented cases of devourer trees coordinating attacks across multiple star systems, hunters' webs sharing tactical information through some form of biochemical communication network, and mind-eaters deliberately targeting quarantine stations to compromise our containment efforts. The human took another bite of whatever he was eating. This time, ZYX was certain she could smell something from across the auditorium, a sharp, distinctive aroma that seemed oddly familiar but completely out of place. The plants aren't just evolving, she continued, trying to ignore the distraction. They're collaborating. We've identified what appear to be symbiotic relationships between different species, working together to overcome planetary defenses that would stop any single organism. She showed footage from a failed evacuation on Kepler's edge, where crimson whispers had released their pollen to drive populations toward areas where hunters' webs waited in ambush, while screaming thorns created underground corridors that prevented escape. The coordination suggests a level of strategic thinking that challenges our fundamental understanding of plant intelligence, she said. These aren't individual organisms acting on instinct, they're components of a larger intelligence that we're only beginning to recognize. A worried murmur ran through the audience. The implications were staggering. If the deadly plants were actually part of some vast network intelligence, the threat they represented was far greater than anyone had realized. Which brings us to the question that haunts every researcher in this field, ZYX said, her voice dropping to a more serious tone. Are we witnessing natural evolution, or are these plants the products of deliberate design? The auditorium fell completely silent. This was cutting-edge theory, the kind of speculation that could make or break careers. Consider the evidence, she continued. Every one of these species is perfectly adapted to eliminate intelligent life. Not just any life, specifically intelligent life. They show preferences for higher brain functions, they target communication networks, they disrupt social structures. This level of specialization suggests purpose. A student near the back raised her hand. Are you suggesting these plants were created as weapons? I'm suggesting that the patterns we observe are consistent with deliberate engineering, ZYX replied carefully. Whether that engineering was biological, technological, or something else entirely remains to be determined. The smell from the human's direction was getting stronger now, and she finally recognized it. Capsaicin. The human was eating something containing capsaicin. But that was impossible. Capsaicin was one of the most potent defensive compounds known to botanical science, a toxin so powerful that even trace amounts could cause severe reactions in most species. She found herself staring openly now, her lecture momentarily forgotten. The human seemed to notice her attention and looked up with what appeared to be mild curiosity. "Excuse me," she said, addressing him directly for the first time. "What exactly are you eating?" Marcus Chen looked down at his lunch, then back up at her with an expression of genuine confusion. "A sandwich?" "A sandwich containing what?" she pressed. "Jalapeno peppers, mostly," he replied, taking another bite. "Some habaneros for heat. A little ghost pepper sauce for flavor." The auditorium erupted into shocked gasps. Several students immediately moved away from the human, and Dr. Pextala actually fell off her chair in surprise. "You're consuming capsaicin-bearing plants?" ZYX-Thera asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "Well, yeah," Marcus said, seeming genuinely puzzled by the reaction. "It's lunchtime." "Do you have any idea what you're doing?" she demanded, her professional composure finally cracking. "Those compounds are lethal to most known life forms." Marcus paused mid-chew, looking around at the terrified faces staring back at him. "Are they? I mean, they're spicy, but..." "Spicy?" ZYX-Thera repeated the word as if she'd never heard it before. "You know," Marcus said, making a vague gesture with his sandwich. "Hot. Burns a little. Makes you sweat. Spicy. You experience pain from these compounds and continue consuming them voluntarily?" asked Dr. Pextala, who had managed to climb back into her seat. "It's not really pain," Marcus explained patiently. "It's more like, well, it's hard to describe. It burns, but it's a good burn. It makes the food taste better." ZYX-Thera felt the ground shifting beneath her worldview. "Are you telling me that humans regularly consume toxic compounds for pleasure?" "Not just peppers," Marcus said, warming to the topic. "We also eat things like garlic, which is supposed to be antimicrobial. Onions, which contain sulfur compounds that make most animals avoid them. Mustard, horseradish, wasabi." He paused, noticing the increasingly horrified expressions around him. "Are these not normal things to eat?" A Valterian student spoke up, her voice shaking. "Mustard seeds contain compounds similar to those used in chemical warfare. Horseradish contains toxins that can cause severe respiratory distress," added another. "And wasabi," Dr. Pextala said faintly, "contains isothiocyanates that are used in industrial pest control." Marcus looked down at his sandwich with new interest. "Ha! I never thought about it that way." ZYX-Thera found herself gripping the edge of her podium so tightly that her knuckles had turned white. "What else do humans consume that might be considered unusual?" "Well," Marcus said thoughtfully, "there's coffee, which is technically a drug. Tea, which contains tannins that are supposed to be defensive compounds. Chocolate, which is toxic to most earth animals. Alcohol, which is literally poison that we drink for fun." Each revelation hit the audience like a physical blow. The idea that an entire species would regularly consume toxic substances for pleasure was beyond comprehension. "Cinnamon," Marcus continued, apparently enjoying himself now, "is tree bark. Vanilla comes from orchid pods. Nutmeg can be hallucinogenic in large doses. Black pepper was so valuable it was sometimes used as currency because most other species couldn't handle it." "Stop," ZYX-Thera said weakly. But Marcus was on a roll now. "Oh, and we deliberately cultivate bacteria and fungi to eat. Cheese is basically controlled decomposition. Yogurt is live bacterial cultures. Mushrooms are fungi, which aren't even plants. We consume living bacterial colonies," Dr. Pextala repeated in horror. "Billions of them," Marcus confirmed cheerfully. "They're supposed to be good for digestion." ZYX-Thera sank into her chair, her mind reeling. Everything she thought she knew about biochemistry and toxicology was being challenged by a single human's lunch habits. "The fungi," she managed to say. What kinds of fungi do humans eat? Oh, all sorts, Marcus replied. Button mushrooms, shiitakes, portobellas, chanterelles. Some people even eat ones that cause hallucinations, though that's not legal everywhere. You deliberately consume psychoactive fungi? Some people do. I'm more of a beer guy myself. Beer? Fermented grain. Another one of those alcohol things I mentioned. A student near the front raised a trembling hand. Professor, is it possible that humans are immune to plant toxins? No, Marcus interjected before ZYX could answer. We can definitely be poisoned by plants. There are plenty of things we can't eat. Deadly nightshade will kill you pretty quick. So will oleander, or castor beans, or deathcap mushrooms. But, you can distinguish between edible and inedible toxic plants? ZYX asked. Usually. Sometimes people make mistakes, but we generally know what's safe. How do you know? Marcus shrugged. Trial and error, mostly. Over thousands of years. If eating something killed your ancestors, you probably shouldn't eat it either. The casual way he described what amounted to species-wide experimental toxicology made ZYX feel faint. Your species developed tolerance to plant toxins through deliberate exposure? Not deliberate, exactly. More like, necessary? Plants don't want to be eaten, so they develop defenses. Animals that want to eat them develop ways around those defenses. It's just evolution. But, the compounds you described, capsaicin, isothiocyanates, tannins, these are serious defensive mechanisms. The levels of tolerance you're describing shouldn't be possible without significant evolutionary pressure. Marcus took another bite of his sandwich and chewed thoughtfully. What kind of plants grow on Earth are way more dangerous than what you've been showing us? Every being in the auditorium turned to stare at him. I'm sorry, what? ZYX asked. Marcus Chen seemed to realize he had said something significant, based on the way everyone in the auditorium was staring at him with expressions ranging from disbelief to outright terror. He swallowed his bite of sandwich carefully and set it down on the desk in front of him. I mean, he said slowly, some of the stuff you've been describing is pretty nasty, don't get me wrong. But, compared to what we deal with on Earth. He trailed off, apparently realizing that continuing might not be wise. Please, ZYX said, her voice barely steady. Continue. Marcus looked uncomfortable now, as if he was beginning to understand that he might have stumbled into dangerous territory. Look, I'm not a botanist or anything. I just grew up on a farm. Maybe I'm wrong about this. What exactly are you wrong about? Dr. Pextala asked gently. Well, Marcus said, fidgeting with his sandwich wrapper, you were talking about plants that kill people, right? And I was thinking about some of the things we have back home, and they seem worse? Worse how? ZYX prompted. Marcus took a deep breath. Okay, so you mentioned that crimson whisper thing that kills people in 30 seconds with its pollen. That's pretty fast. But we have something called manchineel trees. If you stand under one during rain, the water dripping off the leaves will give you chemical burns. If you burn the wood, the smoke will blind you. If you eat the fruit. He shrugged. Well, it's called the death apple for a reason. And humans live alongside these trees, a student asked in horror. Oh yeah. They grow all over the Caribbean. We just put up signs warning people not to touch them. Signs, ZYX repeated flatly. Warning signs. You know, like danger, do not touch. Most people are smart enough to listen. Most people? Marcus winced slightly. Well, there are always a few tourists who think they know better. The casual way he discussed what amounted to casual botanical homicide left the audience speechless. ZYX struggled to process the implications. Are there other examples? Castor bean plants, Marcus said, apparently warming to the topic despite his earlier hesitation. The seeds contain ricin, which is one of the most potent toxins known. A few seeds can kill an adult human. And these grow where? Pretty much everywhere. They're actually considered decorative in some places. People plant them in their gardens because they have nice leaves. A collective gasp ran through the auditorium. The idea of deliberately cultivating deadly plants for aesthetic purposes was beyond comprehension for most species. Foxglove is another one, Marcus continued. Contains digitalis, which affects heart rhythm. Beautiful purple flowers, really popular in gardens. But every part of the plant is toxic. Humans cultivate cardiac toxins in their gardens? Dr. Pextala asked faintly. For the flowers, Marcus explained, as if this made perfect sense. They're really pretty. What about aggressive plants? ZYXthera asked, thinking of the hunter's web. Plants that actively pursue prey? Marcus considered this. Well, we don't really have anything that chases people around. But we do have some that are pretty good at catching things. Venus flytraps, obviously. Sundews, which are basically covered in sticky traps. Pitcher plants that create slippery-sided death pits for insects. These are carnivorous plants? Yeah, they supplement their nutrition by eating meat. Mostly insects, but some of the bigger pitcher plants can catch frogs, lizards, even small mammals. How large do these pitcher plants grow? Asked a student. Oh, not too big. Maybe a foot across for the really big ones. Though I heard there are some in Southeast Asia that have been known to catch rats. The relief in the room was palpable. Foot-wide carnivorous plants seemed manageable compared to the continent-spanning monstrosities ZYXthera had been describing. Of course, Marcus added thoughtfully, that's not counting the really dangerous ones. The relief evaporated instantly. Really dangerous ones? ZYXthera asked carefully. Well, like stinging nettle. That stuff will cause burning pain on contact, and the effect can last for hours. It grows everywhere, and it's really hard to get rid of because it spreads underground. This is worse than the carnivorous plants. How? Dr. Pextala inquired. Oh, it's not worse than pitcher plants, Marcus clarified. I was thinking more about things like giant hogweed. That's the really scary stuff. Giant hogweed? Yeah, it can grow 15 feet tall, and its sap causes severe burns when exposed to sunlight. Like third-degree chemical burns. And it spreads fast. Each plant can produce 50,000 seeds. The auditorium had gone completely silent. A 15-foot-tall plant that caused severe burns and reproduced prolifically sounded exactly like the kind of botanical nightmare ZYXthera had been warning them about. Where do these plants grow? She asked. All over Europe and North America now, Marcus replied. They were originally from the Caucasus region, but they've spread pretty much everywhere with a temperate climate. And humans simply live with these plants? Well, we try to control them when we can. But they're pretty hard to kill safely. You can't just cut them down because that exposes you to the sap. You need special protective equipment. ZYXthera felt as if the universe had shifted around her. Are there others? Others? Other plants that cause severe injury. Marcus scratched his head. Well, there's wild parsnip, which is similar to giant hogweed but smaller. Poison ivy, poison oak, and poison sumac all cause severe allergic reactions in most humans. Tread softly has stinging hairs that can penetrate skin and clothing. These plants are common? Poison ivy is everywhere in North America. You basically can't go hiking without running into it. Most people learn to recognize the leaves of 3, let it be, when they're kids. Children are taught to identify dangerous plants as part of basic education? Well, yeah. Otherwise they'd be in the hospital all the time. Dr. Pextala leaned forward. Marcus, how many species of dangerous plants exist on Earth? Dangerous how? Marcus asked. Like, immediately deadly, or just harmful, or? Let's start with immediately deadly. Marcus thought for a moment. Well, there's castor beans, oleander, foxglove, lily of the valley, yew trees, deathcap mushrooms, destroying angel mushrooms, water hemlock, poison hemlock, white snakeroot, rosary pea, tobacco tree, jimsonweed. He paused. Do you want me to keep going? Please. Monkshood, larkspur, autumn crocus, angel's trumpet, bloodroot, mayapple, pokeweed, bittersweet nightshade, black nightshade. Marcus frowned. Actually, there are a lot of nightshades. The whole family is pretty toxic. How many is a lot? ZYXthera asked weakly. Oh, hundreds of species. Maybe thousands. Most of them contain alkaloids that affect the nervous system. The number hit the audience like a physical blow. Hundreds of species of deadly plants on a single world was unheard of. And, these grow naturally? A student asked. Yeah, they're native plants. Well, most of them. Some have been introduced from other regions. What about the harmful but not immediately deadly plants? Dr. Pextala inquired. Marcus winced. That's a really long list. Do you want me to just hit the highlights? Please. Stinging nettle, which I mentioned. Giant hogweed and wild parsnip for the burn causers. All the poison ivies and oaks. Thistles, which have sharp spines. Blackberry bushes, which also have thorns but at least you get berries. Rose bushes, same deal but flowers. Honey locust trees have thorns that can be 6 inches long and sharp enough to puncture tires. Puncture what? Asked a Regelian student. Vehicle tires. They're made of tough rubber compounds, but honey locust thorns can go right through them. These thorns are how long? ZYXthera asked. 6 inches. Sometimes longer. The trees use them for protection against large herbivores. What kind of herbivores require 6-inch thorns to deter? Oh, we don't have the big herbivores anymore, Marcus said casually. They went extinct. Mastodons, ground sloths, that kind of thing. The trees haven't adapted yet. The implications of this statement took a moment to sink in. The dangerous plants Marcus was describing were evolutionary responses to megafauna that no longer existed, which meant they were over-engineered for their current environment. What happened to these large herbivores? ZYXthera asked, though she was beginning to suspect she knew the answer. Humans, mostly, Marcus replied. We hunted most of the megafauna to extinction pretty early in our development. Climate change got some of them too. So the plants that evolved to defend against these creatures now use those same defenses against humans? Well, yeah. I mean, the plants don't know the mastodons are gone. Dr. Pextala was scribbling furious notes. Marcus, in your opinion, what is the single most dangerous plant on Earth? Marcus considered the question seriously. That's tough. If we're talking about individual toxicity, probably the deathcap mushroom. A single cap contains enough toxins to kill an adult, and there's no antidote. The toxins destroy your liver and kidneys over several days. But ZYXthera sensed there was more. But if we're talking about overall danger to human civilization, I'd probably say kudzu. Kudzu? It's a vine. Grows incredibly fast, up to a foot per day in good conditions. It covers everything. Trees, buildings, power lines, cars. People call it the vine that ate the South because it's covered huge areas of the southeastern United States. This vine kills people, asked a student. Not directly, Marcus admitted. But it brings down power lines, which can electrocute people. It covers road signs, which causes accidents. It can pull down trees onto houses. And it's basically impossible to get rid of once it gets established. How fast did you say it grows? ZYXthera asked. A foot per day. Sometimes faster if conditions are really good. And it can grow 60 feet in a single growing season. The auditorium erupted in shocked whispers. A plant that could grow 60 feet in a few months and covered everything in its path sounded exactly like the kind of aggressive botanical threat they'd been discussing. But here's the really crazy thing about kudzu, Marcus continued, oblivious to the terror he was causing. We imported it on purpose. You imported it? Yeah, back in the early 1900s. It was supposed to help with soil erosion. Seemed like a good idea at the time. The casual mention of deliberately introducing an unstoppable invasive plant species left the audience speechless. Dr. Pextala was the first to recover. Are there other examples of humans introducing dangerous plants? Oh, tons, Marcus replied cheerfully. Most of our worst invasive species were introduced intentionally at some point. The silence that followed Marcus's casual admission stretched on for nearly a full minute. ZYXthera found herself staring at the human with a mixture of fascination and horror that was becoming disturbingly familiar. The idea that any species would deliberately import dangerous organisms was difficult enough to process, but to do it repeatedly suggested either remarkable stupidity or remarkable confidence. Given what she was learning about human dietary habits, she was beginning to suspect it might be confidence. Perhaps, she said carefully, you could give us some examples of these intentionally introduced species? Sure, Marcus replied, pulling out a small device that ZYXthera recognized as a primitive data storage unit. He consulted it briefly. Let's see. Japanese knotweed was brought to Europe and North America as an ornamental plant. Now it can grow through concrete foundations and is basically impossible to eradicate. It grows through concrete? A student asked weakly. Yeah, the roots can penetrate tiny cracks and expand them. It can destroy building foundations, roads, sidewalks. In the UK, it's actually illegal to plant it, and you have to disclose it when selling property because it can devalue real estate so much. Dr. Pextala was taking notes frantically. What else? Water hyacinth, Marcus continued. Beautiful purple flowers, grows in ponds and lakes. Problem is, it doubles its population every 2 weeks under good conditions. Doubles every 2 weeks? ZYXthera repeated. Yeah. It can completely cover a lake in a matter of months, choking out all other aquatic life. They introduced it to waterways all over the world for decoration before anyone realized how fast it spreads. Purple loosestrife is another one, Marcus added. Pretty purple flowers, but each plant can produce over 2 million seeds per year. It takes over wetlands and destroys native ecosystems. 2 million seeds, Dr. Pextala muttered, scribbling. Per plant. Per year. Oh, and then there's the Australian pine, which isn't actually a pine at all. It was planted for erosion control in Florida, but it drops so many needles that it changes soil chemistry and kills everything else. Plus the trees are shallow-rooted, so they fall over easily in storms. ZYXthera realized she was gripping her podium again. These plants were all introduced for beneficial purposes? Yeah, that's the crazy part. Most of our worst invasive species were brought in to solve some other problem, or just because people thought they looked nice. What about purely decorative plants? Asked a student. Surely those would be harmless? Marcus laughed, though not unkindly. You'd think so, wouldn't you? But some of our most dangerous invasives were introduced purely for looks. English ivy was brought to North America because people wanted familiar plants from their homeland. Now it covers entire forests, blocking sunlight and eventually killing all the trees. It kills trees? Slowly, Marcus confirmed. It climbs up the trunks and covers all the leaves, so the tree can't photosynthesize. Takes a few years, but eventually the whole tree dies. Are there any examples of plants that were introduced for food purposes? ZYXthera asked, though she was beginning to dread the answer. Well, there's Pueraria montana, Marcus said. Though you probably know it by its common name. Which is? Kudzu. I mentioned it earlier. The auditorium erupted in shocked murmurs. Dr. Pextala dropped her stylus. You're telling us, ZYXthera said slowly, that the plant you described as eating an entire geographic region was originally introduced as a food crop? Well, food and erosion control, Marcus clarified. The leaves are edible, and the roots can be processed into starch. Still eaten in some parts of Asia. Humans eat the plant that grows a foot per day? Sure. Actually, eating it is one of the ways people try to control it now. There are cookbooks dedicated to kudzu recipes. A student near the front raised a trembling hand. Are there other examples of humans eating their invasive plants? Oh, tons, Marcus replied enthusiastically. Dandelions, which most people consider weeds, are completely edible. Leaves, flowers, roots. Same with plantain, which grows in pretty much every yard and is actually really nutritious. Nutritious weeds, Dr. Pextala repeated faintly. Garlic mustard is edible and actually tastes pretty good. Wild onions are everywhere. Purslane is considered a superfood now, really high in omega-3 fatty acids. You consume omega-3 fatty acids from plants? Asked a Regelian student in surprise. Sure. Fish are the main source, but purslane has them too. Plus it's succulent, so it's good in salads. ZYXthera felt as if she was falling down a rabbit hole of increasingly impossible revelations. Marcus, let me ask you a direct question. How many plant species do humans regularly consume as food? Marcus scratched his head. Regularly? Or just occasionally? Let's start with regularly. Well, there are the major grains: wheat, rice, corn, barley, oats. Legumes like beans, peas, lentils, peanuts. Tree nuts like almonds, walnuts, cashews. Fruits. He paused. There are a lot of fruits. Approximately how many fruits? Dr. Pextala asked. Just common ones? Apples, oranges, bananas, grapes, strawberries, blueberries, raspberries, blackberries, cherries, peaches, pears, plums, watermelons, cantaloupes, pineapples, mangoes, papayas, kiwi. Marcus trailed off. I'm probably forgetting some. And vegetables? Oh, that's an even longer list. Tomatoes, potatoes, onions, garlic, carrots, celery, lettuce, spinach, broccoli, cauliflower, cabbage, peppers, all kinds of peppers, cucumber, zucchini, eggplant. He paused again. Plus all the herbs and spices. How many herbs and spices? ZYXthera asked weakly. Hundreds, Marcus replied. Maybe thousands if you count regional variations. Basil, oregano, thyme, sage, rosemary, parsley, cilantro, dill, mint, ginger, turmeric, cinnamon, cloves, nutmeg, cardamom, cumin, coriander, fennel, star anise. Stop, ZYXthera said. Just stop for a moment. She needed time to process what she was hearing. Humans didn't just tolerate plant toxins, they actively sought them out. They consumed hundreds of different plant species regularly, many of which contained compounds that would be harmful or lethal to other species. They imported dangerous plants for aesthetic reasons, then ate the ones that became problematic. Marcus, she said finally, what percentage of human food comes from plants? Oh, most of it, he replied. Even our meat animals eat plants, so it's plants all the way down, really. And humans developed this diet naturally? Well, over thousands of years of agriculture, yeah. We started out hunting and gathering, but we've been farming for maybe 10,000 years. 10,000 years of deliberate plant cultivation, Dr. Pextala murmured. Yeah, though we've been selectively breeding crops to be better for human consumption. Corn used to be tiny, just little seeds on a grass stalk. We bred it into what it is now. You've been genetically modifying your food plants, a student asked in alarm. Through selective breeding, sure. We pick the plants with the traits we want and plant their seeds. Do that for enough generations and you can change almost anything about a plant. Show them the example with cabbage, Marcus said to himself, then looked up. Actually, this is kind of interesting. We took one wild plant, Brassica oleracea, and turned it into like 6 different vegetables. One plant became 6 vegetables? ZYXthera asked. Yeah. Cabbage, broccoli, cauliflower, Brussels sprouts, kale, and kohlrabi are all the same species. We just selected for different traits. Cabbage is bred for large leaves, broccoli for flower buds, cauliflower for dense flower clusters, Brussels sprouts for small heads along the stem. The casual mention of completely reshaping plant species through selective pressure left the audience stunned. The level of botanical manipulation Marcus was describing casually discussed was beyond what most galactic civilizations achieved with advanced genetic engineering. How long does this selective breeding process take? Dr. Pextala asked. Depends on what you're trying to do. Simple traits might show up in a few generations. Major changes can take decades or centuries. And humans have been doing this for 10,000 years? At least. Probably longer for some crops. And we've gotten really good at it. How good? ZYXthera asked, though she was beginning to suspect she didn't want to know the answer. Well, we turned a bitter, toxic wild plant into sweet corn. We made inedible wild tomatoes into the basis of entire cuisines. We took wild wheat that had to be processed extensively to be safe to eat and turned it into something you can grind into flour and bake into bread. The original forms of these plants were toxic? Yeah, most wild plants are either toxic, indigestible, or just taste terrible. That's their defense against being eaten. So humans specifically selected for plants that overcame their natural defenses? Marcus paused, apparently realizing the implications of what he was saying. I guess so, yeah. And you did this with hundreds of species? Thousands, probably. Every culture has developed its own food crops from local wild plants. Dr. Pextala looked up from her notes. Marcus, is it fair to say that human civilization is built on the systematic conquest of plant defenses? Marcus considered this for a long moment. That's actually a pretty good way to put it, yeah. The auditorium fell silent again as everyone processed this revelation. Humans hadn't just learned to tolerate plant toxins, they had spent millennia systematically identifying useful plants, overwhelming their defensive mechanisms, and reshaping them to serve human purposes. What about plants that couldn't be domesticated? Asked a student. The ones that were too dangerous or difficult to modify? Oh, we found uses for a lot of those too, Marcus replied. Cotton for clothing, hemp for rope and fabric, flax for linen. Trees for lumber and paper. Rubber plants for, well, rubber. You're telling us that humans found ways to exploit even the plants they couldn't eat? Pretty much, yeah. If a plant had useful properties, we figured out how to use it safely. How? ZYXthera asked. Trial and error, mostly. Lots of trial and error over thousands of years. Some of it was probably luck, but we're good at sharing information, so once one group figured out how to do something safely, it spread. And the dangerous plants? The ones you couldn't find uses for? Marcus shrugged. We learned to avoid them, mostly. Though we found uses for some of those too. Such as? Well, like digitalis from foxglove. It's toxic in large doses, but in small doses it can be used to treat heart conditions. You use plant toxins as medicine? Dr. Pextala asked in amazement. Lots of them, Marcus confirmed. Aspirin comes from willow bark. Morphine comes from poppies. Quinine from cinchona trees. Lots of cancer drugs are derived from plant compounds. You're telling us that humans regularly consume plant toxins for medicinal purposes? Well, the dose makes the poison, Marcus replied. Almost anything is toxic in large enough quantities, but useful in small ones. ZYXthera sank back into her chair, her mind reeling. Not only did humans consume plant toxins for pleasure, they had spent millennia systematically conquering the plant kingdom, turning even the most defensive species into useful tools and medicines. Marcus, she said weakly, what exactly do humans consider to be a dangerous plant? Marcus thought about this seriously. Something that can kill you quickly in small doses, I guess. Something you can't find any use for. Something that spreads too fast to control. And how many plants meet those criteria on Earth? Not that many, really. Most plants are useful for something if you know what you're doing. The implications of this statement hit the audience like a physical blow. According to Marcus, humans had found uses for virtually every plant on their world, no matter how dangerous or defensive. They hadn't just survived on a planet full of toxic plants. They had conquered it. The revelation that humans had essentially conquered their planet's flora hung in the air like a toxic cloud. ZYXthera found herself looking at Marcus Chen with entirely new eyes. What she had initially dismissed as a primitive being casually eating during her lecture had transformed into something far more significant, a representative of perhaps the most successful species in the galaxy at dealing with botanical threats. "Marcus," she said carefully, "I need to ask you something, and I want you to think about your answer carefully. In your opinion, based on what I've described about galactic flora, how do you think humans would fare against the plants I've been showing you?" Marcus finished chewing another bite of his sandwich, which now seemed less like casual snacking and more like a declaration of war against the plant kingdom, and considered the question seriously. "Well," he said finally, "some of them would definitely be problems. That soul garden thing that traps people in dreams sounds really dangerous because you wouldn't know you were being attacked. And the mind eater that changes your personality would be scary because you wouldn't know you were infected." "But," ZYXthera prompted, sensing there was more. "But a lot of the others." Marcus shrugged. "I mean, the Crimson Whisper sounds bad, but we deal with airborne toxins all the time. We have gas masks, air filters, sealed environments. And 30 seconds to death is actually pretty slow for a plant toxin." "Slow?" "Well, yeah. We have plants that can kill you in minutes if you eat them. Deathcap mushrooms, water hemlock, that kind of thing. 30 seconds from pollen exposure would give you time to get to safety or put on protective equipment." Dr. Pextala leaned forward. "What about the hunter's web? The mobile carnivorous plant?" "That one's interesting," Marcus admitted. "We don't really have anything that mobile. But 50 kilometers a day isn't that fast, really. A human can cover that distance pretty easily with basic transportation. And if it's as big as your pictures suggest, it would be easy to spot from a distance." "You think humans could outrun it?" "Outrun it, avoid it, probably kill it if necessary," Marcus replied matter-of-factly. "I mean, if it's a plant, it probably needs water and nutrients like any other plant. Cut off its water supply or damage its root system and it would die." "Cut off its water supply," ZYXthera repeated slowly. "You think like a farmer." "Well, I am a farmer," Marcus said with a slight smile. "Third generation. You learn to think about plants as things you can control, not things that control you." "What about the devourer trees? The 2,000-meter tall ones that can walk across continents?" Marcus whistled softly. "Those do sound impressive. But, still, if they're trees, they need a root system. Something that big would need massive amounts of water and nutrients. Target the root system or the water supply and even something that size would eventually die. They're described as intelligent. Strategic. So are humans," Marcus pointed out. "And we're good at killing trees. We've been doing it for thousands of years for farmland and lumber." A Veltarian student spoke up. "But these plants have evolved specifically to kill intelligent life. They're adapted to fight thinking beings." "Sure," Marcus agreed. "But they evolved to fight alien intelligent life. They've never faced humans." "What difference would that make?" the student asked. Marcus thought for a moment. "Well, you've all been talking about these plants like they're unbeatable monsters. But, to me, they just sound like really aggressive weeds." The word weeds hit the auditorium like a bomb blast. The idea of referring to galaxy-threatening botanical nightmares as weeds was so fundamentally alien that it took several seconds for anyone to process it. "Weeds?" Dr. Pextala asked faintly. "Yeah. I mean, they're plants that grow where you don't want them, spread aggressively, and are hard to get rid of. That's basically the definition of a weed." "And humans have experience dealing with weeds?" "Oh, tons," Marcus replied cheerfully. "We've been fighting weeds for as long as we've been farming. We've gotten pretty good at it." "How good?" ZYXthera asked, though she was beginning to suspect she knew where this was going. "Well, we've developed hundreds of different methods for controlling unwanted plant growth. Mechanical removal, chemical herbicides, biological control agents, fire, flooding, controlled grazing, soil modification, crop rotation. Each method Marcus listed sent a fresh wave of shock through the audience. The casual enumeration of what amounted to botanical warfare techniques was staggering. Fire, a student squeaked. Controlled burns are really effective for managing invasive plants, Marcus explained. Some ecosystems actually depend on regular fires to stay healthy. You burn entire ecosystems? When necessary, yeah. Fire is a natural part of many plant cycles. Some plants actually need fire to reproduce. And chemical herbicides? Targeted chemical compounds that interfere with plant growth. We've got selective herbicides that only affect certain types of plants, systemic herbicides that kill the whole plant including the root system, pre-emergent herbicides that prevent seeds from germinating. You've weaponized chemistry against plants, Dr. Pextala said in amazement. I wouldn't say weaponized, Marcus replied thoughtfully. More like, we've figured out how to speak their language. Plants communicate through chemical signals, so we developed chemicals that can disrupt those signals. Biological control agents? ZYX asked weakly. Using other organisms to control plant growth. Insects that eat specific plants, fungi that cause diseases in target species, bacteria that interfere with nutrient uptake. We basically recruit other life forms to help us fight problem plants. You've created alliances with other species specifically to wage war against plants? Well, when you put it like that, it sounds kind of dramatic, Marcus said with a laugh. But, yeah, essentially. A long silence fell over the auditorium as everyone processed the implications of what they were hearing. Humans hadn't just survived on a world full of dangerous plants, they had developed an entire arsenal of techniques for controlling botanical threats. Marcus, ZYX said finally, what would humans do if faced with something like a void hunger? A space-traveling plant that releases spores into planetary atmospheres? Marcus considered this carefully. That's definitely more challenging because it's not ground-based. But, we've got experience with airborne threats too. Atmospheric filtering systems, sealed habitats, orbital defense platforms. Orbital defense platforms? Well, if it's a physical object in space, it can be detected and intercepted. We've got pretty good tracking systems for space debris and incoming objects. You would shoot down a living organism? If it was threatening human life? Yeah, absolutely. Marcus seemed genuinely puzzled by the question. I mean, we shoot down locust swarms when they threaten crops. This would just be the same thing on a larger scale. Dr. Pextala was scribbling notes frantically. What about the psychological effects of something like the Mind Eater? Plants that alter consciousness? That's tricky, Marcus admitted. Though we do have experience with mind-altering substances. We know how to detect when someone's been drugged or is acting strangely. Quarantine protocols, medical monitoring, that kind of thing. And, the soul garden? The plant that traps consciousness in a dream state? That one's really dangerous, Marcus agreed. Though if we knew about it, we could probably develop countermeasures. Keep people moving, use stimulants to prevent deep sleep, maybe develop some kind of technological interface that could pull people out of the dream state. You're suggesting technological solutions to biological threats? Sure. I mean, we use technology to enhance our biological capabilities all the time. If we're outmatched biologically, we compensate with tools. ZYX felt as if her entire understanding of the universe was crumbling. Marcus, let me ask you one final question. If humans encountered the plants I've described today, what do you think the outcome would be? Marcus was quiet for a long moment, apparently giving the question serious consideration. Honestly, he said finally, I think it would be the same as it's always been with humans and plants. We'd figure out which ones we could eat, which ones we could use for medicine or materials, which ones made good decorative plants, and which ones we needed to get rid of. And the ones you needed to get rid of? We'd get rid of them, Marcus said simply. That's what we do. The matter-of-fact way he said it sent chills through the audience. This wasn't bravado or ignorance, it was the calm confidence of a species that had spent millennia systematically conquering biological threats. You make it sound easy, a student said. It's not easy, Marcus corrected. It takes time, planning, resources, and, usually multiple attempts. But, we're persistent. And, we're good at working together when we need to solve a problem. Working together how? ZYX-Thera asked. Well, if we encountered something like those space-traveling plants, it wouldn't just be one person or one country dealing with it. We'd share information, coordinate responses, pool resources. When humans face an existential threat, we tend to put aside our differences and focus on survival. Has this happened before? Sure. We've dealt with pandemic diseases, asteroid impacts, climate shifts, resource shortages. We don't always handle things perfectly, but we usually find a way to survive and adapt. Dr. Pextala looked up from her notes. Marcus, in your honest assessment, do you think humans pose a threat to galactic flora? Marcus seemed surprised by the question. Us? Why would we be a threat? Because, ZYX-Thera said slowly, based on what you've described, humans are possibly the most effective botanical predators in the known galaxy. Botanical predators? Species that systematically hunt, kill, control, and consume plant life. Marcus thought about this for a moment. I guess that's not wrong, exactly. But we don't think of ourselves that way. How do you think of yourselves? As farmers, Marcus replied. We grow things. We take care of plants. By conquering them completely and reshaping them to serve your needs. By working with them, Marcus corrected gently. We give them what they need to grow, and they give us what we need to survive. And if they refuse to cooperate? Marcus shrugged. Then, they're weeds, and we pull them up. The simple, matter-of-fact delivery of what amounted to a death sentence for non-cooperative plant life left the entire auditorium speechless. Finally, ZYX-Thera found her voice. Marcus, I think I need to revise my lecture. Oh? Yes. I've been teaching about the most dangerous plants in the galaxy. But, I think I've been teaching the wrong class. What should you have been teaching? Marcus asked curiously. ZYX-Thera looked around the auditorium at her audience of shocked alien faces, then, back at the human casually finishing his lunch of weaponized plant matter. I should have been teaching about the most dangerous botanical predator in the galaxy, she said quietly. And, apparently, he's been sitting in my back row eating a sandwich the whole time. Marcus looked down at his lunch, then, back up at her with a bemused expression. It's a really good sandwich, he said.